Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how to battle harden your brushless outrunner motors and prepare them for robotic combat. The process consists of basically taking epoxy, slathering it all over the magnets so that when you have a large impact, it doesn't just shatter the magnets everywhere and make your weapon stop from working. So let's look at what's involved in battle hardening your motors. In front of me, I have everything you need to battle harden your motors for combat. Over here, I have 5-minute epoxy. This is just your basic Loctite brand. You can find this at Home Depot. You can probably even find it at your grocery store, Walmart, things like that. It is really common. There's a lot of varieties of epoxy out there. Pretty much all of them are going to work just fine. Keep it nice and simple. Some people will probably recommend like a marine grade epoxy or these specialty epoxies that worked better for them. That is awesome. But for most people, this is going to work out just fine. In addition to that, you just need some basic little tools. I like to use popsicle sticks. Any kind of glue application or epoxy application, I always like to have popsicle sticks on hand. I also have some just really cheap toothpicks, and I have these little plastic cups that are good for mixing, because we're going to be mixing the 2-part epoxy with glass microspheres. These glass microspheres are also called microballoons. You can find these on Amazon. Check the links below in the description for all sorts of places to find these. This is basically going to be a almost like a thickener or a bulking agent for the epoxy. If you use just the bare epoxy, you have to kind of rotate the motors while they dry, or else the epoxy will kind of fall down and it'll kind of make the motor out of balance and things like that. And some people have built like little makeshift hot dog rollers to kind of roll the motor around when the epoxy is curing. I actually just like bulking out the epoxy with these glass microspheres. Instead of dealing with kind of a thinner consistency, you can mix this in. It comes out more like a thick peanut butter. It's a lot easier to apply. It's a lot easier to kind of clean up, and it doesn't really run at all. So I like this. They're also extremely lightweight, and it adds a little bit of structural integrity because, you know, adding some fiberglass essentially to the epoxy is good. And then you're going to need your motors, and that's about it. It's a pretty simple process. Before I show you the actual process, let's take a look at a motor that has been done and one that hasn't been done, and I can show you kind of what the purpose of this is. Here is the motor that I will be battle hardening in this video. It's a prop drive V2 5050. And I'm using this motor mostly because I need to add epoxy to it, for one. It's a brand new motor, so I need to do that to it. For two, it is relatively large, so it'll be easier to show on camera, but pretty much any brushless outrunner motor is going to have the same process. So if you have an ant weight or a beetle weight and you have a much smaller motor, the process is basically the same. It's just a little bit more tedious because it is smaller. If you watched my previous video on how to remove and reshaft these motors, I had just a really simple demonstration of how to take these apart. You basically take some C-clip pliers, you remove the C-clip, and then you can just pull the halves apart like this. And then now you have the two halves. So this motor has actually been battle hardened, and it has epoxy inside. So you can kind of get an idea of what it looks like. I have epoxy all in there and then all inside here. And if you look inside, you can see the magnets have been all epoxied. So let me show you what one looks like that hasn't had this done. So here is the new motor, which is always a little tricky to get apart for the first time. So you can see inside this, there is just kind of gaps in between the magnets. There's a little bit of blue epoxy, and that is all that is holding those magnets in there. Now for some of the smaller motors, these little magnets that are inside of here really aren't glued in all that well, and a hard shock against the side of this shell can just knock them out, and then they will basically just slam against this inside and your motor is ruined. So really during those large impacts, that's a big problem that you see, is the magnet shattering or coming out. So we need to fix that problem. Now, most people don't always do the winding side over here. I like to do both the winding side and the shell. just because it's a little extra added security. There's a little bit less to break in here because this is all kind of fixed in place, but I do like just kind of going overkill, and the micro balloons really don't add any weight whatsoever. This is a negligible weight addition here. The thing that you do have to keep in mind if you're going to be epoxying the windings is that you are adding to some degree a level of insulation, so your motor could heat up a little bit more than normal, although I have not seen this to be an issue. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what we're trying to accomplish here. We're trying to turn this guy into this, and then likewise we're trying to turn this into that. So let's look at the process itself. So here in front of me I have everything prepared. I always like to do these in small batches. I do one side of the motor with one little cup, and then I do the other side of the motor with another little cup. The stuff dries a lot quicker than you would think, so trying to do multiple motors at a time or both halves of the motor can actually get a little tricky. Put on some music, take your time, and just do this nice and slow. I'm going to start with the winding side, and then I'll do this separate. And unfortunately, I usually like to use the power of movie making to kind of, do cuts and stuff like that. But this is going to have to be shot in real time because there kind of is no pausing or going back. So if the narration gets a little terrible or clunky, I apologize for that. But I'm going to try and do this as much in real time as I can. So the first thing we want to do is get some of the micro balloons ready. And here's kind of what this stuff looks like. I just use a, I just use one of these popsicle sticks to kind of dose it out. So yeah, it's just kind of like this white powdery substance that's suspiciously like flour or sugar or sweetener. Yeah, that's it. So we're going to put that over there. Also, don't get this stuff in your lungs. Be very careful with it. It does kind of get airborne very quickly, so just be very careful with that. We're going to pop this little guy out and get our epoxy going. So let me grab a knife for that. Okay, so I got that cut. I'm probably going to be wasting a lot of epoxy here, but it's not that big of a deal. But here's kind of about how much I use. So that's actually probably too much, but that is just fine. I'm doing this for you guys, so wasting a little epoxy is not a big deal. So we got about that much in there, and I kind of add almost equal parts of the glass spheres, and it kind of does mix a little funky, so you just got to be really slow and careful. If you try and mix it too fast, it's just going to go all over the place. But, you've got a little bit of time here. And once it kind of gets incorporated, you can add a little bit more until the consistency is just right. So there we go. So it's kind of mixed up pretty good, and that's kind of what it looks like. So something like that. So I want a little bit thicker than that, so I'll just use another one of these. I use a lot of popsicle sticks for this. About that much. There's really no science to this. Just kind of do what feels right and what looks right to you. Oh yeah, this stuff smells horrible too, so just little FYI, smells terrible. So it's kind of like that. It's a little runny, a little bit oozy, not too bad. I might add just a little bit more. You can kind of keep adding this stuff almost indefinitely. It's really, really weird. It's just kind of odd how that works. So there we go. That's looking pretty good. A little kind of maybe thinned out peanut butter, a little, 30 seconds in the microwave kind of thing. So now our epoxy is ready. Let's get the motor all slathered. So the biggest thing to notice about doing this side is, I can't talk that much, but do not get anything on the bearing. If you do, you're gonna have a bad time. Make sure you have a lot of shop towels or paper towels handy. That's another thing. And also I forgot to mention, but a handy X-Acto knife is critical for this. So make sure you got your X-Acto knife out. Do not cut yourself on camera. The YouTubes will laugh at you. And then really we're just going to take it and just kind of spoon it on there. Make sure it doesn't drip, But yeah, we're just going to kind of go around like that. And you can see I already kind of got some pretty close to the bearing. This is, you know, a little bit tedious. So we're just going to kind of go around like that. I like to kind of do the top first, and then I'll go do the windings later. And so really the process that I like to do is add it and then kind of take it off a little bit. And that's what the X-Acto is for. And in the very beginning, this stuff will kind of even itself out. So you can see it's already kind of falling down on the sides, and that is exactly what we're looking for. So just be really careful. And then just kind of spread it around the top. That looks just fine. And I got a little bit on the bearing. It's actually not on the inside, just on the outside. So I'm just going to scrape that off. And this is where the toothpicks come in handy as well. They're really good at pulling that up out of it. There, so that looks good. And then you can just kind of work this into the inside if you want. And then we can kind of just drag it through the top. You don't want to have too much on there. Here we go, and you can kind of just spin it up in there. So now the next step is to get it on the outsides. So this part's actually not too bad. I just use the toothpick to kind of go inside and just kind of swipe it down. Don't worry about being too messy right now. We're going to go back with the X-Acto and clean that all up. So you can just kind of pull up some on the toothpick and go in the middle just like that. Just kind of push it down in there. And if you want to get lazy, you can just do it this way too. Just kind of spread it on there. And just because I'm doing this one on camera, this is probably going to be the ugliest and the worst one I will do. But yeah, it's kind of like icing a really horrible, smelly cake. It's a little bit like that. So yeah, I'm just going to kind of fill in all those gaps. And you can see it's not really running on the top much. The microballoons really do help this out, which is nice. And it's always about this stage in the process that I wonder, what am I doing? Am I just going to ruin this motor? Every single time. That's exactly what I think. And it's about this point that it will actually start setting up a little bit. It's going to get a little bit kind of stickier and gooier, like I'm not able to spread it out as nicely as it once was. So trying to do two of these at the same time is just, you're just asking for trouble. So yeah, so that looks like it's pretty well covered. So now we're going to basically take this off. So I got my X-Acto knife here, and what I'm going to do is just kind of scrape down the side of the motor like that, and just basically cut it off. And we're just going to go all the way around the motor. I wish I could set this down. See how pretty that looks? It's a little bit of a tedious process, but you can see this is a really good way to do this because it's consistent. And you see we got a little bit of extra right there. Just kind of scrape it. We're not really scraping the metal, we're just kind of peeling this outer skin of epoxy off. So the epoxy doesn't really like sticking to the outside of this metal as much, so it actually comes off nice and clean, which is pretty cool. So that is actually looking pretty good. What I want to do is clean up kind of around the top rim. There's still a little bit of a lip up there. Like right there you can kind of tell there's a little bit of a lip. And so we're just going to scrape off all the excess that we can because we don't want this to interfere with anything. But it's really, really gooey right now. Yeah, this is almost completely set up in there. And this is actually a neat stage to work with it because you can kind of just cut it away almost like a plastic. You can see like right there, I can just very easily scrape that whole thing off, no problem. So it's actually kind of in a nice state where it's solidified enough that I can just kind of scrape it off. However, in this state, if you do mess with anything up top, it's going to get a little ugly, just so you know. So that looks pretty good. So here is the point where I'm reasonably satisfied with how this went. Now I'm going to take the shell. This is the kind of tricky part. I'm going to put this on, spin it around, and make sure nothing is bound up and I don't have any issues. And you just want to be really careful with this because you don't want these two halves to slam together. Nice, spins perfectly free. So now we're going to separate these two again. And then this right here is good to set aside. So this half of the motor is done. I'm just going to kind of clean it up a little bit. And there you go. So this half is done. I probably could have done a little bit better job right there and there, but that's gonna be just fine. I could see if I can get a little bit extra on there. Whoop, that was almost really bad. So let me see, yeah, this is completely dried up. So that is about how long it takes for this stuff to dry up. So I'm going to reset, get another little thing of this, and we will work on the other side. So here we are with the other side. I'm going to get a nice fresh shop towel here at the bottom. Now the trick with this side, with the other one we didn't want to get it on the bearing. With this we don't want to get it anywhere on the shaft. If you are going to be reshafting your motors and you're going to be removing the shaft, this would be a fantastic time just to remove the shaft altogether. You just undo the set screws at the end, pop that whole shaft out. That would be a good idea. If you're going to play in hard mode like I am and keep the shaft in there, a little piece of heat shrink tubing over there. Now you don't have to worry about getting anything on the shaft. When you're done, just pop that right out. So that's just kind of a easy way to do it. The first time I did this, I used blue painter's tape all around there, and that was not fun. So we're gonna mix up the epoxy just like before. So this one's a little bit trickier because these are magnets, and of course our X-Acto is going to want to do that. So we're going to be relying a lot more on these popsicle sticks. So you're going to kind of start out the same way. I like to use a little bit less on there, and then we're just going to go inside very carefully and just kind of scrape. I don't know how I can show this on camera. Just kind of scrape flat along the inside surface like that. And sometimes you can kind of set it down, roll it like that. And we're just trying to kind of push the epoxy inside the gaps in those magnets. So set it inside between the magnets and then just kind of swipe it along and make sure you fill it inside those gaps. So you're moving it more left to right than you are front to back. Don't move it toward the back of this and don't move it to the front of this. Just move it, if you have extra, move it side to side. That's kind of what you're looking for. So you can maybe see we've got it mostly, this is tough to see, it's mostly inside of there. There's a couple little voids, a couple little gaps. And we're just going to fill those in. This takes a lot less of the epoxy, so there's a little gap right there. So ideally we kind of want this to set up just a little bit because it's just going to kind of smear right now. So this is where I take my toothpicks, I think we got enough of that, and then just kind of try and swipe away as much as possible that's actually on the magnets. It's a little tedious, but it's not too bad. You kind of want to go sideways a little bit. You don't want to swipe straight across because then the toothpick will fall into that little groove. The other thing you could do if you like really tedious things is you could put a little bit on there and then just boop, go right through the gap in between. I mean, you can definitely do that. It's going to be really tricky. You're going to get some everywhere. I kind of like applying it and then removing it better. That's kind of more my speed. And so it's kind of starting to set up just a little bit inside there. So now I'm just going to start taking fresh popsicle sticks. Just kind of swiping it along. Notice I'm kind of using the shaft as an anchor point for my hand. Oops, pulled that out. And so, you know, I got a decent little bit off of it that time. And we're just going to kind of keep doing this until the only epoxy that's left is primarily inside, in between the magnets. Oh, also, if you like wearing gloves, this is probably a really good time to wear gloves. I don't like wearing gloves for this stuff. I like the tactile feel of being able to, you know, feel what I'm touching. But if you want to wear gloves, this is a great opportunity to wear some gloves because this stuff is gross and sticky. And so once again, this stuff really doesn't want to stick to the magnets as much as you might think. It wants to stick in between them. So you can kind of just scrape the face of the magnets. I wish I could show this better on camera, but I'm just kind of scraping against the face of the magnets while kind of rolling the toothpick, and it's just kind of picking up all that extra epoxy that's on the faces of the magnets. Now this doesn't have to be perfect. You don't want a ton sitting on the outside, so you want to kind of wipe off as much as possible, but you can have a little bit on the outside. It's not really going to mess anything up. The motor's still going to spin, and we can do the trick. So this is almost already set up. We can do the trick like we did before with a razor blade if you really run into an issue. So I'm just going to keep trying to scrape some of this off. It's going to get easier as it sets up. And then I'm going to go in. This is tricky because it is magnetic. But, you know. So it looks okay. So this one is still drying over here, or curing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take another base that I have and kind of spin this around and see if I'm rubbing in any area. I don't want to do it on this because I don't want to epoxy the two together because that would be bad. So I've got this one that's already done, and I'm just going to kind of run it around and see if there's any problem areas. And yeah, actually not. It feels just fine on there, and I don't really see any issues. So that feels okay. So let's see if I can focus here. You can see there's quite a bit still on the magnets there. Really not a big deal. It's there's enough of a gap in between that it's okay. So I also kind of like going down like that, kind of scraping down along. The epoxy will want to stick to the popsicle stick more than it does the shiny metal magnets. So doing that actually works pretty okay. There we go. That's pretty much it. I'm going to take a toothpick and run it along this edge right there. Just kind of clean up this edge a little bit. There's just a little bit along that edge. And you can do this for hours. I mean, you can just sit here and clean this up forever, but you might not need to. My phone's blowing up over here. I bet you money that's Casey Coons. That feels like Casey. All right. So this is pretty well almost set up. I'm going to give it one last spin on this. That feels awesome. And at this point, I feel pretty confident that this is set up enough and this is set up enough that I'm going to try these two together, make sure they spin and mate together nice. And look at that. Nice and good. So these come apart and we'll let those cure. You should have no issue with anything sagging down. You can see this is, it's actually the slightest bit tacky, but that is not going anywhere, nor is that. And that is all there is to it. We now have a new motor that is all filled in with epoxy, and this can take all sorts of abuse and impacts and all that good stuff that will happen during combat. The process is largely the same for pretty much any outrunner, so don't worry if yours looks a little bit different. The process is pretty much the same. Ultimately, what I want people to get out of this video is just kind of what the consistency looks like and really how easy it is to kind of clean up. You don't ever want to take a paper towel and try and wipe this off, things like that. You want to use, a toothpick, popsicle stick, something like that to actually kind of scrape it off, and that is the process that I found works best. So hopefully this video gives you a better idea of how to battle harden your very own motors. If you like this video, you can help me out by using the Amazon link down below. If you just use that Amazon link, it will help give a kickback to my channel to help support all my little videos and the stuff that I do. Also, you can check me out on Facebook to follow updates and progress and little projects that I'm working on. And as always, thanks for watching. See you next time.